Virtua Racing would undoubtedly become one of the most important and iconic games of the early 3D generation within video games, and would become noticeable worldwide when it hit the arcades. While there was other 3D games that had come before it, this was the one that really set the stage for everything else that would soon come after it, because not long after that we would see the new and next generation of consoles with the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation and the like, and Virtua Racing was one of those titles that managed to really put 3D graphics on the map. While the game itself, when we look at it from a visual standpoint, everything had low polygonal aesthetics and visuals and was untextured, but what it presented was a visual masterpiece for its time that broke new grounds, as it was stunning to look at, and there was nothing else really like it at the time, especially with its level of detail, the sense of speed, the control. And when it released in the arcades, it was massive, so it would be no surprise that the game would see multitude of ports onto all of Sega's systems, mainly with the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, and even later another port with the Sega 32X add-on. Now there are some varying differences in terms of the overall quality, and I have to say the Mega Drive edition was extremely impressive, how that game was able to run on a lesser powered system the way that it did, and how it plays as good as it does. It was a marvel in technology and the limits of what they were able to push to at the time. But then the 32X version again adapted on that even more so, adding in some additional features that wasn't in the Genesis version or even in the arcade for that matter. But then we later get to the Sega Saturn, as Virtua Racing would receive a port of the game in 1995, and this was able to match the arcade in almost every way, even down to its gameplay, its sense of speed, everything. Visually, for a Sega Saturn game, even though it's often said that the Sega Saturn wasn't as good at 3D capabilities compared to other consoles of the time, but the game looks stunning on the system. There's virtually no slowdown when you're racing. Everything just looks and plays and feels like as if you're playing in the arcade, even down to the control methods using the controller of the time. Very fluid, very responsive. What was great about this edition was that compared to other ports was that it received so much more in terms of content. You had different modes, you had different championships. Yes, you had the arcade mode that consisted of the original 3 tracks from the arcade edition, but you also had different features with even a championship mode. You also had the ability to play using different vehicles, anything from the likes of your Formula 1 cars, even to like exotic or super sports cars or racing cars, stock cars, and even as low as go-kart racers. And regardless of which format you chose, the game just played incredible. Plus you also had a lot more tracks, with 10 in total, being a massive overhaul from the 3 seen in the original arcade game, all with their own characteristics and visual features, and they just look stunning for the time. Even when you look back, as even when going back to playing the game for capturing footage for this video, the game still looks incredible even by today's standards. I think that low poly visual aesthetic really is timeless, because there's no textures on the screen. What you see is what you get, and it really doesn't look out of place, because you see a lot of modern games being released on modern platforms with the likes of Steam, even systems with the PS5, Xbox, and a lot of these newer indie style racing games are all using that classic visual aesthetic that all took their influences from this very game. And the fact is that this game is well over 30 years old as of recording this video. It manages to stand toe to toe with those games in every respect. It hasn't really aged at all when you look at it. It's still well able to hold its own in every regard. For its time, the Sega Saturn version was quite often seen as the definitive version of the game on home systems, with this version also getting a later port on the Sony PlayStation 2 in Japan under the Sega Ages 2500 series, and it too would bolster more improved visuals to make full use of the PlayStation 2's power outputs and capabilities, but would add in even more features that weren't present in all of these other games. And it's a very cool edition of the game indeed, a very solid experience. I actually did cover a video of that game over on one of my other channels, PS2 Gaming Memories, a while ago, so I'll leave a link to that if you want to head over and check that out as well. But yeah, there's a lot to do here, a lot to keep you busy. The races can be quite long, especially in the championship modes, because you don't have the same aesthetic that you would have with normal racing games where you have maybe 3 to 5 laps. This case you have to go anywhere between 8 to 12 laps. It will take you a while to get through some of the races, and they are challenging, and also depending on the difficulty that you choose in the beginning. But with a bit of time, effort and patience, you'll get familiar familiar with the handling dynamics of each of the vehicles, as they do present different challenges in their own right. Even with the go-karts, because while yes they're quite small, they do feel a lot different compared to the more larger vehicles, and also they're not as fast. So there is caveats around that. Now it just really depends on your own play style. But what's really cool about this version of the game as well is with the in-car like cockpit view. As for its time, it was very detailed, as you could really see everything that was going on behind the scenes with you changing gears, using the steering wheel to turn left and right. Yeah, it's very, very cool indeed. And plus it gave you a massive sense of speed, which a lot of games really didn't or were capable of doing back then. So it just added so much more appeal. It took everything that was great from the arcade edition or original and just expanded on it in so many different ways. A very, very cool game, definitely worth playing. Even for myself looking back, the first time I ever would have played Virtua Racing would have been on the Mega Drive itself, and I was really impressed by it. The fact is that it was able to run on that console, but then later getting to play it in the arcade and was awesome. But I have to say the Sega Saturn version is just epic. It really is. Still plays really, really well, can't fault it. It's just a really good solid game. Plus if you're a fan of that series of games, you do have to play this version if you want quite possibly the most definitive experience, especially for that time. But still, all of the additions and ports of the game are definitely worth playing, which I will cover in future videos, just to share the comparisons between them all. Solid experience all around, I'm sure you'd agree.